Welcome everybody to another episode on Just for the Modders. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This video is going to be my first tutorial or how-to video, which is going to address the Chinese Homage watches. Now, I received an email from a subscriber not too long ago where he had a concern where he removed the bezel from a Pagani design watch. And he had a bit of difficulty putting it back together because it is not the usual standard of bezel that we see, or the actual mechanism behind it. So if you look back at episode 4, I believe, where I talk about the bezels on the Seiko SKX 013 and the Monster, which is the project that I'm doing, you've got that traditional click spring mechanism that we see on Seikos. Now, my expertise is only in Seikos, so I don't know how the other watch brands do it, but these AliExpress watches, these Chinese Homage watches of the Seikos, they use a very different mechanism, and you find that same mechanism on the Pagani design, and that mechanism basically involves a retention wire. That's what gives you that click, and it involves just the way it's put together is quite different, and if you were to pop it off, it is very difficult to get back on if you haven't had previous coaching, or there's no tutorial out there. Through my experience, I've been reviewing watches for I think coming up to a year now, and about 99% of that is the watches that come out from China and the Chinese Homages. And even though I'm reviewing the watches and I'll try to break down which one's better, I do quite a fair few comparisons. I think when you start taking them apart, you get a much better indication of which is actually a lot better, and how they fare amongst each other, what level of machining has gone into it, just to give you a better, how can I put it, better overview of the quality that you are getting with that watch that you buy. So I've got a variety of bezel inserts here, bezels, sorry, here, a few AliExpress watches, Chinese Homages, and I'm gonna take them apart, break it down, give you as much information as I can on what to expect when you do try to take the bezels off. Now, first and foremost, when it comes to these Homage watches, what I want to address is what will happen when you do open these watches out. So we're just talking about the bezels now. Number one, you cannot replace the bezels. Even if you get a SKX Homage from Heimdallr, from Steel Dive, you will never be able to put a SKX aftermarket bezel onto the watch. That's because the fitting, the mechanism they're two very different things. There's no click spring involved, so it's not going to just be, you're not going to be able to just fit it back on. And why would you want to take one of these off if you can't replace the bezel, you can't change the look of the bezel? Easy. People do that to take off the bezel insert. So that is primarily the reason why you will be taking off bezels on these kind of watches. So what's the story with the Heimdallr? That's the story. So I had two Heimdallrs, and this was my actual original one that I bought about a year ago, and I just got curious one day. I thought, let me just open it, and what I ended up doing is, this was the actual bezel that took off this. I ended up bending it. It wouldn't sit back on, so I snapped the ceramic bezel insert as well. So a whole host of stuff happened, but I don't mind doing that at all, because it's a great learning curve for me. It's a great opportunity for me to learn, and hopefully this is why I want to start the channel, is so I can feed back to the subscribers and it will prevent you from making these mistakes. Now, I then ended up getting another Heimdallr. I had another problem with that one, but let's not even go there yet. So what I did, basically, I cannibalized one, took off the bezel, and managed to replace it on my original one. So what was the problem? Why did it bend? Okay, what you'll notice is, from China, you get different types of bezels. Now, you've got to pay attention when you rotate them, and you get a good feel. Now, while I've been reviewing these watches, I have mentioned it on a few videos that they just feel lighter. There is a clear difference between the kind of bezel. Now, number one, not all of the bezels are 316L stainless steel. Some are a cheaper version, a cheaper style of steel. I think 306, I forget what the numbers are, but just a grade or two below actual 316L. So that is going to affect the integrity of it, number one. Now, number two, the thing is look how thin this actual bezel is. Now you compare that to your Seiko bezels, even with the aftermarket parts, they're solid stainless steel and thick, so you can pry them off without bending them. Now this one, the reason it bent is because I used my pry tool and I went it from one side and I just pressed up and literally it just buckled under the strain. And what I then found is there's this wire here which fits into this hole on the case, and that is what held or made that ratchet sound. So if I turn the bezel over, you can have a look at all these small little teeth here, and what this actually does, this is what makes that sound when you're turning it. Now there is a plus to this. If the bezel's done right and you've got the right kind of retention wire, the bezel sound, the movement on the bezel is, you can get a really perfect one, much better than Seiko's. So for example, the Heimdallr has a very tight bezel, and at the same time there's zero backplay, right? And the alignment usually is perfect, as you can see. So that's awesome. And same thing with the Proxima, right? There is a difference between bezels. So the Proxima bezel is a lot better, it is a lot thicker, even, and the way you know is by rotating it if they feel light or not. So this is full 316L stainless steel, the bezel is. And you know, then when people wonder why you're paying so much for certain brands, you know, it's down to these small little details, these small little parts, which will add the value at the end. So this one is a lot better. We're going to open this one and we're going to show you what's in there. But when it comes to these, the thinner, skinnier bezels, I don't recommend that you try taking them off. It's going to be a hit and miss. If I took this one off now to show you, there's a chance that I could damage the bezel, because I'm sure there's a knack point to it. And the way I actually took it off the correct way with the you know, the donut Heimdallr 62 mass I had, is I had to insert and pry just ever so gently and go around to the other side. Now, for the subscriber who asked the question, it was a Pagani design. Now, Pagani design, the bezels are appalling, right? Forget what, you know, value for money. The actual bezel is rubbish. There's a lot of play in it, vertical, horizontal. They're also very light and tinny, but you also feel that they are quite thin. Now, with those bezels, again, you want to be really careful. So fair play for attempting it and not damaging it and getting it off. And the main problem there is, now how do you get it back on? Sorry, it's worth mentioning now, in the middle of the bezel, you will more than likely always have this little wire here as well, which is multi-sided. So you can just, I'll take it out. This is what it looks like. Now that is a retention wire that will keep the bezel onto the case. The way it does that is, there's a little groove on the actual case, and once you've got this wire to hold the ratchet part of the bezel, this little wire here should slot right into here and keep the bezel from popping off. So you put the wire back in the center. Now you can, if you're not careful, totally snap it or bend it or break it, but you know, with most things you just need to be a bit careful and exercise some caution. Once you've put that back in, let's get this wire back in. Okay, that's in. Just use your thumb and keep that wire located. Now the key with this is, just hopefully I can show you properly, you want to get that wire to catch in the teeth, right? Once you catch that wire there, so we've caught the wire in the teeth there now, yeah, you can hear that rotating. Literally rotate and just press on. Now the beauty of this bezel is, or these kinds of bezels, is that the wire that is holding the bezel into the case, that groove. You don't actually need a crystal press. You can just use your hands and snap it on in most cases, and you are good to go. Now this is on perfectly, right? It's just the fact that I did bend it that it's not going to sit right, but you can see here that it rotates and you get that click sound, right? Now let's do this on the Proxima. Tool, pry tool. Now, because I've done it on this before, I know it's quite easy, but I would recommend you put a bit of insulation tape to make sure your watches are protected. And what you want to do is slip in and pop it off. Right, there we go. That is off. Now look at the wire used by Proxima. It is a lot longer, and you can have a look at the inside of this bezel. So you can see that wire, the retention wire that is inside that bezel. And this, you know, there's going to be grades, there's going to be better quality, and this wire looks a lot better than the one used on the Heimdallr. Let's just get this wire back out. So this retention wire, as opposed to the one we saw on the Heimdallr, is a lot longer, so it gives you that smoother clip. So what we're doing here is with the Proxima, we're going to do the same thing, is slot the end back into the hole. Just use your thumb. It is quite fiddly, especially when you've got half a thumb, but just bear with me. Right, so once that's sat in, okay, you want to make sure it sits right in there. There you have it. That took a lot longer than anticipated. However, as you saw, what I ended up doing was I held it down with the end part down with the screwdriver, rotated it on, and just pressed it on. Sometimes you just gotta adapt to see what is the best way. So the bezel is in, and you can see it's still solid. So that's it. That's all this video is. It was really to help out the subscriber who asked the question, and fair play for him to opening up that Pagani design and having a go. But I do not recommend messing with these bezels. Like I said, the Proxima is okay because, you know, it is pure 316L stainless steel. It's quite thick as well. But when it comes to the thinner bezels, as I previously spoke about, have a go at a watch that you're not really bothered about, but then figure out a knack way of doing it, just so you can get your hand kind of stable at doing it. So that's the end of the video. Thank you everyone for watching today, and I'll see you for the next one.